This is the face of the most dreaded man in all of Russia. Hated by the Kremlin, the oligarchs, and corporate organizations, he stood firmly against the rot and corruption in his country until the end. But who was he? How did he gain the power and influence strong enough to terrify Vladimir Putin? And what happened to him in the final hours of his life? One of the strengths of dictators is the compliance they enjoy from their docile followers. Most pseudo-democratic leaders hate the idea of opposition and will do anything to crush it. This is why when Alexei dared to be different, he knew that his stance would cost him everything.
Как можно победить эту ненасытную жабу, партию «Единая Россия»? И до тех пор, пока мы от них не избавимся, шансов на нормальную жизнь у нас нет.
In this video, which he did in Siberia sometime in 2020, he calls citizens to vote out the ruling party in their forthcoming local and regional elections. As far as he's concerned, the party leaders, spearheaded by someone like Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, do not have the people's interests at heart.
Привет, это Навальный. Привет, это Навальный. Привет, это Навальный. Ну что, вы готовы вместе с нами ловить жуликов за руку?
However, this was one of the several hundreds of videos that he had on his YouTube channel. With over 6 million loyal subscribers, Alexei's popularity grew among Russians, tired of their leaders' high-handedness. What started as a blog and YouTube channel to air his grievances against the corruption soon became a platform that will eventually thrust the budding activist into politics, pitting him against some of the most powerful forces in the Kremlin. But who was Alexei Navalny, and how did he build a force so strong it terrified the Russian government? Well, let's start from the very beginning. Alexei was born on 4th of June 1976 to mid-income but hard-working parents. While his mother is Russian, his father is Ukrainian. After obtaining a law degree in 1991, he went on to study securities and exchanges at the financial university under the government of the Russian Federation. Alexei's interests in these two fields will be responsible for his views about the government later in his life. His first foray into politics was in 2000, when he joined the Russian United Democratic Party, Yabloko. He rose from the regional council of the Moscow branch to eventually become the chief of staff of the branch. However, Alexei was grossly dissatisfied with the operations of the party. He felt the party was largely ineffective and called for a change of leadership, especially after their woeful election performance in December 2007. For his outspoken nature and criticism of the party leader, Grigory Yavlinsky, he was expelled from the party. These political intrigues seemed to prepare him for the harder task ahead. If he felt he was challenging the system, he was about to be exposed to overwhelming filth in a system that celebrated and thrived in corruption. The man, Vladimir Putin. In 1975, a young, devoted Vladimir Putin was recruited to join the KGB, the intelligence unit of the Soviet Union at the time. He rose through the ranks to become a lieutenant colonel, but had to resign following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991. Afterward, he joined politics in Petersburg. In the years that followed, Putin rose in his political career. From all indications, he had his eyes set on the ultimate prize of leading the Russian nation. His opportunity came in 2000 when he became the acting president of Russia after Boris Yeltsin resigned. As soon as he got into power, Putin pretty much began a state capture program. Although he temporarily stepped aside in 2008 for Dmitry Medvedev for a single tenure, he was still in power as he served as the prime minister. And by 2012, Putin was fully back in power, something he's held on to date. It's widely believed that he and Medvedev had an arrangement to hand power back to Putin at the end of his tenure. Medvedev himself confirms this political deal. He also remains a close ally of Putin. This alliance has greatly enriched him. With his victory in place after the 2012 elections, although most Russians believe the elections were flawed, Putin doubled down on his state capture agenda and soon captured the media.
These jubilant images betray the fact that Vladimir Putin's victory is marred by allegations of cheating, something that his emotional speech couldn't hide.
Thanks to the overwhelming support of our voters, this is a fair and honest victory. We will work hard, we will succeed.
After his victory, a state-controlled media was inaugurated, and others were sidelined. The Russian leader proceeded to plant his loyalists in the electioneering body of the country, as well as the legal system. However, he wasn't done. His next line of action involved going after the oligarchy class. While some of them turned their loyalty over to him, others wouldn't. Top on the list included Nikolai Glushkov, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and Boris Berezovsky. These anti-Putin billionaires were soon accused of embezzlement. Eventually, Nikolai and Boris die in London under suspicious circumstances, while Mikhail remains in exile.
Following the pathologist's report, British police say they've launched an investigation into what they're now calling the murder in London earlier this week of Russian businessman Nikolai Glushkov. Initially, the 68-year-old's sudden death was unexplained, but the medical report concluded his death was due to neck compression, in other words, strangulation. Glushkov was once a successful businessman and friend of the late oligarch Boris Berezovsky. Both fell foul of Vladimir Putin and fled Russia to live in London, from where Berezovsky criticized the Kremlin until his premature 2013 death.
With most of his opponents out of the way, Putin was prepared to consolidate his power in the country. This was the Russia that Alexei had come to know. However, a business decision would lead him to uncover one of the most scandalous secrets about the government. Alexei exposes the transport industry. Sometime in 2008, Alexei's business-savvy nature led him to invest 300,000 rubles in some Russian oil and gas companies. Some of the companies included Gazprom, Gazprom Neft, Lukoil, and others. As a stakeholder, he was given access to some classified documents, allowing him to inspect the company's books, which was their mistake. They probably thought Alexei was as corrupt as them, but they were wrong. Once Alexei got a hold of the documents, what he found shocked him to his very core. Embezzlement that didn't make sense, high-level theft, and a lack of transparency were some of the things he uncovered. However, it was only when he audited the state-owned transportation industry, Transneft, that he found state-enabled financial recklessness. Alexei then took matters into his own hands and publicly published these records showing the financial indiscretions. For the first time in a long time, the Russian people were shown the true face of their government. But how did Alexei reach millions of people with this discovery as the media was under control of the government? It turns out he started a blog, which gained a huge following. As Russians read dozens of reports, Alexei quickly gained a large following. A dissenter had been born, something the Putin's government detested. Alexei soon turned to YouTube, where he began to feed the people with the much-needed information about the true state of things in the country. As his fame grew, so did the Kremlin's hatred for him also. Of course, Transneft denied any wrongdoing. An official stated they will not respond to entries made in a personal diary, quote-unquote, referring to Alexei's blog. The young activist's popularity among the Russian people continued to grow as he regularly updated his blog and channels with corruption in the government. Although the political class and oligarchies in bed with the Russian government hated his guts, Alexei had no plans to slow down as he continued to create platforms that further exposed the rots in the affairs of things in the country. For instance, in 2011, he launched a project called Rosyama, which means Russian hole. The initiative was to report potholes to the government and monitor their responses to the complaints. This was getting too much for the government, which had enjoyed the cooperation of the media. You see, when the government controls the media, they dictate what the citizens have access to. In most cases, these are propaganda and everything that makes the government look good in the citizens' eyes. However, Alexei had snatched that power from them to a great extent. In another publication, he spoke about a fraudulent real estate deal between Russia and Hungary. The investigation into this led to the arrest of the Hungarian officials involved in February 2011. Between 2017 and 2018, he put out more publications that implicated Dmitry Medvedev and Viktor Solotov, the head of the National Guard of Russia, respectively.
Полёская дача, горная резиденция, родовое гнездо в Курской области, агробизнес там же, дома на Рублевке, виноградники, старинные особняки.
In both cases, he brought corruption charges against them. His allegations against both men were practically ignored, especially that of Dmitry, being the prime minister and all. Unwavering in his desire to expose the ills in his country, Alexei staged anti-corruption protests.
Крадено очень много голосов. Очевидна махинация, очевидно это жульничество. Причем оно было сделано настолько уверен, что выйдет миллион.
He was also imprisoned shortly after he accused Dmitry in March of 2017 on charges of leading what they tagged an illegal protest and fined about 20,000 rubles. Alexei was relentless as he uncovered one dishonest practice after the other. The mighty and protected people who once felt untouchable now had a constant pain in the person of Navalny to deal with. If they thought he was going to lose some steam afterward, they were wrong. It was now clear that Alexei was growing really powerful and something had to be done about this. A date with death. After a fiery political outing in Siberia in August 2020, Alexei and his spokesperson, Kira Yarmysh, were returning to Moscow on a flight that was only supposed to last about 4 hours. Kira remembers Alexei watching an episode of Rick and Morty when he suddenly began to look pale. He complained about how he felt and soon needed to use the bathroom, but he never made it there as he collapsed to the ground in severe pain. He was eventually taken to a hospital in Germany, where he was found to have been poisoned. That morning, before boarding the plane, Alexei had refused to eat and simply requested a cup of tea.
Бред этот, что с декабря 16-го года 8 ассасинов, да, охотятся. Почему? Причем они живут с ним в одном доме, но в Москве травить нельзя. Вы понимаете? Надо летать по всему миру.
8 человек с высшим образованием, химическим и так далее и тому подобное, не могут несколько лет сделать что-то с одним, значит, обормотом.
Я сегодня ребенку показываю ТикТок. Но он просит, покажи ТикТок. И вдруг я вижу... Алексей Навальный открывает рот под американцем.
Unfortunately, his enemies were relentless and found a way to poison him with a deadly Russian nerve agent, Novichok. This was not the first time that this bioweapon had been used on someone who irritated the Kremlin. In 2018, a middle-aged man and his daughter were found almost dead, close to a shopping center in Salisbury. His name was Sergei Skripal, and his daughter's name was Yulia. Sergei was a double agent, serving the interests of Russia and the United Kingdom in the 1990s and 2000s. After his arrest in 2004 by Russian intelligence, he was tried and sentenced to 13 years in prison. However, under a spy swap program, he found his way to the United Kingdom in 2010. 8 years later, during a visit, he and his daughter were struggling for their lives after being exposed to the deadly Novichok agent. Thankfully, they both survived the ordeal. Current reports reveal they now live under a new identity in Europe. In any case, the poison had begun to take effect on Alexei's body. As his system began to shut down, he was placed on a ventilator in the German hospital where the pilot made an emergency landing. After a rough time, he miraculously survived. This was largely due to the emergency landing of the pilot and the swiftness of the medical personnel who attended to him. Alexei later said the reason he was groaning so loudly on the plane was not really because of the pain, but the knowledge of his imminent death. Had Alexei's tea been spiked with the same agent? Well, not at all. In a shocking prank call where Alexei pretended to be a security agent preparing a security report on Alexei for the Kremlin, the actual chemical weapons expert Konstantin Kudryavtsev, who poisoned him, confessed that the poison was placed on his underpants.
Konstantin.
It is an extraordinary scene. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny on the phone with one of the FSB unit he believes poisoned him in August. Navalny is pretending to be a senior figure from Russia's National Security Council investigating the attempted assassination. The operative Konstantin Kudryavtsev is hesitant at first, but then reveals the poison was placed on Navalny's underpants.
Well, imagine underpants, and in what place?
The insides, the groin.
The crotch of the underpants?
Well, the so-called flap. There are such seams there.
Did all these deter him from his campaign or scare him into quietness? Absolutely not. Knowing his life was in danger, Alexei voluntarily returned to Moscow. His final days. Alexei didn't even get to take his bath because as soon as he landed in Moscow in January 2021, he was arrested at the airport on charges of parole violation. You see, sometime between 2013 and 2014, Alexei was arrested on trumped-up charges of embezzlement and inappropriate financial dealings. After being sentenced to 5 years in prison, the sentence was suspended almost immediately and he was released on bail. This was the same case that he was now being arrested for. While in detention, Alexei's team continued his work and released a video showing a palatial estate allegedly belonging to President Putin.
We head now to the Black Sea and to a sprawling palace complex with its own amphitheater, a tea house, and a helipad. Who owns it? Well, Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny has released a 2-hour video investigation into the complex saying the palace was built for Russian President Vladimir Putin using taxpayer money. The Kremlin has denied those allegations. The video was posted by Navalny's team 2 days after he was jailed upon returning to Russia.
Секретный дворец в России. Дворец Путина под Геленджиком. Владимир Путин мнит себя русским императором и ведет себя соответствующе.
This video had over 113 million views. Putin denied owning this real estate, and Arkady Romanovich Rotenberg, the president's longtime friend and judo partner, claimed ownership of the palatial structure. Of course, this was a direct attack on Putin, and Alexei had to be stopped, so he was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in prison. The days that followed will see Alexei subjected to psychological torture, such as sleep deprivation and deliberate neglect. Reports say he was awakened by prison guards as many as 8 times each night, and made to say before a prison camera that he was still in custody. Of course, this was only a form of psychological torture. In describing his prison cell, Kira says it was deliberately built to deny whoever stayed there any comfort. Alexei was about 6 feet 3 inches, and the cell barely accommodated his stature. Kira also said his bed was taken away at dawn, and he wasn't allowed to lie on the cold, uncomfortable floor. He was provided a chair to sit upon, but I can only imagine this put a strain on his back as it wasn't created for comfort or leisure. His personal doctor was not allowed to see him, as the authorities claimed his health was fine. All attempts to see him were rejected. At some point, some doctors and journalists who went to check upon him were arrested. Over time, he's believed to have suffered loss of sensation in both hands. He also had spinal disc herniation, which happens when the spine is subjected to extreme strain, which should give you an insight into what he was going through at the prison. It's obvious that the Kremlin had a plan to slowly kill him, and they were doing a good job at this. However, this wasn't all. it appears that there was a deliberate attempt not only to kill him, but to make his state-sponsored execution serve as a deterrent to anyone who dared to confront it. Alexei's blood soon revealed there was a spike of potassium in it. This chemical element is believed to increase the chances of a cardiac attack or kidney failure. It's possible that his meals were spiked with higher levels of potassium than required by the body. For all his years of opposition, this was payback time, and those responsible for it wanted to enjoy every minute of their sadistic actions. Alexei was denied in all forms of access to the library, books, or newspapers. His prison was also several thousands of kilometers away in Siberia, far removed from his loved ones. By the 17th of April 2021, Alexei's health had significantly deteriorated. His physician, Anastasia Yevgenyeva Vasilyeva, took to social media to lament her inability to see her patient. She was certain that his conditions were grave and that he could die at any time. Between his arrest in 2021 and 2023, more charges were leveled against him, and he was eventually moved to a special prison in August 2023. Among the many allegations he was being charged for, inciting the Russian people was one. By February 2024, Alexei was a shadow of himself. Of course, his strong spirit never faltered, but his time in prison had taken a toll on his body. His last known appearance is of him cracking a joke with a judge via a video call from his special penal prison cell.
47-year-old Alexei Navalny was looking healthy, joking with a judge via video link from his Arctic prison just yesterday.
After this interaction, he's believed to have taken a walk, but suddenly fell unconscious. According to prison officials, all attempts to revive him were unsuccessful. How convenient. By the next day, 17th of February 2024, Kira announced his death. Navalny's death sent shockwaves across the entire Russian political landscape and indeed the world. While Ukraine President Volodymyr Alexandrovich Zelensky and Joe Biden, the United States of America leader, both accused Putin of being directly responsible for his death, other world leaders were more discreet. They expressed their condolences but made no accusations of the Kremlin. A few men had dared to challenge the Russian leader, but Alexei did so almost effortlessly. Now, with Alexei, you never know who is behind his death. Here's what I mean. It's not news that Alexei's blog and channels accused entire corporations, compromised oligarchs, and other powerful people in the nation. It's possible that one of these persons could have masterminded his demise. He'd already been poisoned once, even as a free man, and he had a lot of enemies. The truth, however, is Alexei's unprecedented exposure of corruption by the Putin-led government and the oligarchs put him at odds with many of them, and any of them could have masterminded his eventual end, or the disturbing state of his imprisoned life. In such, Alexei's campaign and desire for fairness were not restricted to only Russia. Between 2016 and 2017, he relentlessly exposed the Chechen leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, for his corruption and repression of human rights. Although Chechnya is supposed to be an independent republic, it still pays its allegiance to the Kremlin. Some of the articles from Human Rights Watch featuring human rights abuse in Chechnya under Ramzan had input from Alexei. Although the Chechen leader denied all forms of wrongdoing, these articles, largely published in Russian, include the Kremlin's Chechen protege and Chechnya, a republic of fear. Suggest otherwise? If there was one man who hated Navalny's boldness, it was Ramzan. With Alexei's arrest, it's possible that this ally of Putin had something to do with his death. It's no secret that Kadyrov openly supports Russia's hostilities against Ukraine and, the Kremlin in general. If Ramzan had no hand in Alexei's demise, then I'd also consider rogue agents. Some rogue agents could have taken Alexei's life, using him as the ultimate sacrifice for the good of the entire country. He died a painful and deteriorating death, but what you might not know is that Alexei suddenly, quote-unquote, died on the night before a major US-Russia prisoner swap. You see, Alexei had been selected to be part of a special program that would see American citizens like Paul Whelan, a former Marine, and Ivan Gershkovich, a US Wall Street journalist, swapped with Russian detainees in America and other countries. The duo had been accused of being spies. It was later revealed in a press conference held shortly after his death that the United States had been in talks with Russia to add Alexei to the detainees being released. And shortly after that conversation, Alexei just happened to kick the bucket. That was really convenient for the Russian party. In the end, there's no way to know exactly what happened to the brave opposition leader in the final hours of his life because, the mystery surrounding his demise, but Alexei's legacy lives on. His grieving but bold widow, Yulia Navalnaya, has vowed to uphold his struggles for the liberation of Russia. Rest in peace, Alexei.